In a world shaped by ancient empires, forgotten battles, and revolutionary ideas, every nation carries within it a story waiting to be told. Welcome to the Whispering Tome. This is our country's series, where we journey through the complete history of the world's most fascinating nations. From the first settlements to the modern day, from legendary rulers to ordinary people who changed everything. No shortcuts, no oversimplifications, just history the way it deserves to be told. Our first chapter takes us to the Indian subcontinent. 5,000 years, hundreds of empires, one incredible story. This is India. In the great theater of human civilization, few stages have witnessed as many acts of triumph, tragedy, and transformation as the Indian subcontinent. This is a land where the earliest urban planners designed cities with sophisticated drainage systems 4,000 years before the modern era. Where empires rose like monsoon clouds, casting shadows across half a continent, only to dissolve into the mists of history. Where philosophers questioned the nature of reality, while mathematicians gifted the world the concept of zero, the nothing that changed everything. India's story is not a single narrative, but a symphony of countless voices. The chants of Vedic priests echoing across millennia, the war cries of conquering armies, the whispered prayers in temple sanctuaries, and the revolutionary speeches that would eventually bring an empire to its knees without a single shot fired in anger. This is the history of India. Our story begins not with kings or conquests, but with mud. Specifically, the rich alluvial soil deposited by two great rivers, the Indus and the now-vanished Ghaggar-Hakra, once called the Sarasvati. Here, in what is now Pakistan and northwestern India, arose one of humanity's earliest and most sophisticated urban civilizations. The Indus Valley Civilization, also known as the Harappan civilization after one of its major sites, flourished between 3,300 and 1300 BCE. At its peak around 2500 BCE, it covered an area larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined, nearly 1.3 million square kilometers. This was no collection of primitive villages. The Harappans built cities. Mohenjo-daro, meaning Mound of the Dead in Sindhi, stands as the civilization's greatest testament. Walking through its ruins today, one encounters something remarkable: a grid pattern. The city was planned. Streets ran in straight lines, intersecting at right angles. This level of urban organization would not be seen again in India for nearly 2,000 years. But it is the infrastructure beneath these streets that truly astonishes archaeologists. The Harappans constructed an elaborate drainage system. Nearly every house connected to covered drains that ran along the streets, eventually emptying into larger channels. Citizens of Mohenjo-daro enjoyed private bathrooms and toilets connected to this network, amenities that much of the world would not possess until the 19th century. At the heart of the city stood the Great Bath, a large waterproofed pool that may have served ritual purposes. The Harappans clearly valued cleanliness, perhaps for religious reasons we can only speculate about, for their writing system remains undeciphered. And therein lies one of history's great mysteries. The Harappans left behind thousands of inscribed seals, typically featuring an animal, often a unicorn-like creature or a humped bull, accompanied by a sequence of symbols. These symbols almost certainly constitute a writing system, yet despite decades of effort by linguists and cryptographers, they have never been successfully decoded. The Harappans speak to us across 4 millennia, but we cannot understand their words. What we can understand is their commerce. Harappan artifacts have been found in Mesopotamia, suggesting a robust trade network. They crafted exquisite jewelry, worked in bronze and copper, and developed standardized weights and measures, essential tools for a trading society. Their cities show evidence of social stratification, but, intriguingly, no obvious palaces or temples dominating the urban landscape. Some scholars suggest this indicates a society organized around trade and perhaps religious equality rather than despotic kingship. Then, around 1900 BCE, something changed. The great cities began to decline. Mohenjo-daro shows evidence of deteriorating infrastructure in its final centuries. By 1300 BCE, the civilization had essentially vanished, its people dispersed into smaller agricultural communities. What killed the Indus Valley Civilization? Climate change likely played a role. The monsoon patterns shifted, the Ghaggar-Hakra river system dried up, and the agricultural surplus that supported urban life diminished. Some evidence suggests flooding and earthquakes contributed to the decline. The old theory of Aryan invasion, waves of warriors sweeping down from Central Asia to destroy these cities, has largely been abandoned by modern scholars. The people did not vanish. They adapted, migrated, and their cultural DNA wove itself into the fabric of what would become Indian civilization. But their cities crumbled into the earth, forgotten until British railway workers in the 19th century stumbled upon ancient bricks being used by local villagers for construction material. As the Harappan cities faded, a new chapter in Indian history was being written, quite literally. The Vedic period takes its name from the Vedas, a collection of religious texts composed in Sanskrit that remain sacred to Hindus today. These are among the oldest religious scriptures in continuous use anywhere on Earth. The question of who composed the Vedas remains contentious. The traditional view holds that Indo-Aryan peoples migrated into the Indian subcontinent from Central Asia around 1500 BCE, bringing with them the Sanskrit language, horse-drawn chariots, and the religious ideas that would evolve into Hinduism. This migration theory, supported by linguistic evidence and recent genetic studies, does not imply conquest so much as gradual cultural diffusion over centuries. The earliest Veda, the Rig-Veda, describes a society of pastoral nomads organized into tribes led by chiefs called rajas. These were not the absolute monarchs of later Indian history, but leaders whose power depended on success in cattle raids and warfare. The economy centered on cattle, wealth was measured in cows, and some scholars believe the word for war in early Sanskrit literally meant a desire for more cows. The Rig-Veda also reveals a society deeply concerned with cosmic order. The gods of the Vedic pantheon, Indra the warrior, Agni the fire god, Varuna the guardian of cosmic law, were propitiated through elaborate sacrificial rituals. The correct performance of these rituals was believed to maintain the order of the universe itself. Over time, Vedic society became increasingly complex and stratified. The later Vedic period saw the emergence of the Varna system, a division of society into four broad categories: Brahmins, priests and scholars; Kshatriyas, warriors and rulers; Vaisyas, merchants and farmers; and Sudras, servants and laborers. This system, which would later rigidify into the caste system, was justified through the famous Purusha Sukta hymn, which described the four Varnas as emerging from the body of a cosmic being. The later Vedic period also witnessed a geographic shift. The Indo-Aryans gradually moved eastward from the Punjab into the Gangetic plain, clearing forests and establishing agricultural settlements. Rice cultivation replaced the wheat and barley of the northwest. Small tribal kingdoms, or Janapadas, emerged, constantly warring with one another for territory and resources. But perhaps the most significant development of this era occurred not in political organization, but in thought. Sometime around 800–500 BCE, Indian thinkers produced the Upanishads, philosophical texts that moved beyond ritual performance to grapple with profound metaphysical questions. What is the nature of reality? What is the self? How does one escape the cycle of rebirth? The Upanishads introduced concepts that would become central to Indian philosophy: Brahman, the ultimate reality underlying all existence; Atman, the individual soul, and the idea that liberating the soul from the cycle of death and rebirth represents the highest goal of human life. These ideas would influence not only Hinduism, but the new religious movements about to emerge in the 6th century BCE. The 6th century BCE was a time of remarkable ferment across the ancient world. In Greece, philosophers questioned the nature of matter. In Persia, Zoroaster preached of cosmic struggle between good and evil. In China, Confucius articulated his vision of social harmony. And in India, the spiritual and political landscape was about to be transformed. By this time, the numerous Janapadas had consolidated into 16 major kingdoms, called the Mahajanapadas. These competed for dominance in the Gangetic plain, their wars chronicled in the epic literature that would later be compiled as the Mahabharata. But it was in the religious sphere that the most revolutionary changes occurred. Siddhartha Gautama was born around 563 BCE into a royal family of the Shakya clan in what is now Nepal. According to tradition, he lived a sheltered life of luxury until, venturing outside the palace, he encountered the realities of old age, sickness, and death. This confrontation with suffering set him on a spiritual quest that ended under a bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya, where he achieved enlightenment and became the Buddha, the awakened one. The Buddha's teachings offered a middle path between ascetic self-denial and worldly indulgence. He diagnosed the human condition as fundamentally characterized by suffering, identified craving as its cause, and prescribed the Eightfold Path as the cure. Notably, the Buddha did not emphasize the Vedic gods or Brahmanical rituals. His was a practical philosophy focused on individual liberation through ethical conduct, meditation, and wisdom. Around the same time, another spiritual teacher named Mahavira systematized the principles of Jainism. Like Buddhism, Jainism rejected Vedic ritualism and the authority of the Brahmins. Jains embraced radical nonviolence, ahimsa to the point of wearing cloth masks to avoid accidentally inhaling insects and sweeping the ground before them to prevent stepping on living creatures. Both Buddhism and Jainism attracted followers among the merchant classes, who chafed at their low position in the Varna hierarchy dominated by Brahmins and Kshatriyas. While these spiritual revolutions unfolded, political revolution was brewing in the northwest. In 326 BCE, Alexander the Great, having conquered the Persian Empire, crossed into India. He defeated the Punjabi king Porus at the Battle of the Hydesps, but found his troops unwilling to march further into the subcontinent. Alexander retreated, leaving behind Greek garrisons that would not long survive his death. But Alexander's invasion had cracked open the door. Into this vacuum stepped one of the most remarkable figures in Indian history, Chandragupta Maurya. With the guidance of his cunning advisor Kautilya, author of the Arthashastra, ancient India's most famous treatise on statecraft, Chandragupta overthrew the Nanda dynasty and established the Maurya Empire around 322 BCE. The Maurya Empire was India's first truly subcontinental polity. At its height, it controlled territory from Afghanistan to Bengal, from the Himalayas to the Deccan Plateau. Chandragupta's administration was sophisticated. A network of spies monitored the empire, roads connected distant provinces, and a complex bureaucracy managed everything from tax collection to the regulation of prostitution. But it was Chandragupta's grandson who would leave the deepest mark on Indian history. Ashoka ascended to the throne around 268 BCE and initially proved himself a ruthless conqueror. His campaign against the kingdom of Kalinga was so bloody that the sight of the carnage reportedly transformed him. He converted to Buddhism and dedicated the rest of his reign to promoting dharma, righteous conduct. Ashoka's rock and pillar edicts, inscribed throughout his empire, represent some of the earliest decipherable Indian writing. They proclaim his commitment to nonviolence, religious tolerance, and the welfare of his subjects. He established hospitals for humans and animals, planted trees along roads for shade, and sent Buddhist missionaries as far as Sri Lanka and possibly the Mediterranean world. The Ashokan pillar, topped by 4 lions, became the national emblem of modern India. Yet the Maurya Empire did not long survive Ashoka's death in 232 BCE. His successors lacked his ability, and within 50 years, the empire had fragmented. In 185 BCE, the last Maurya emperor was assassinated by his own general, ending India's first great imperial experiment. The 5 centuries following the Maurya collapse were a time of fragmentation and foreign intrusion. The Indo-Greek kingdoms in the northwest gave way to the Scythians, Shakas, who in turn yielded to the Kushans, Central Asian nomads who built an empire stretching from Afghanistan to the Gangetic Plain. It was under Kushan patronage that Gandhara Buddhist art flourished, blending Greek artistic techniques with Indian religious subjects to produce some of the first anthropomorphic images of the Buddha. In the south, powerful kingdoms emerged largely independent of northern turmoil. The Cholas, Cheras, and Pandyas dominated the Tamil country, developing a vibrant literary culture and establishing maritime trade networks reaching as far as Southeast Asia and the Roman Empire. Roman coins have been found in abundance at southern Indian archaeological sites, testimony to a luxury trade in spices, textiles, and precious stones. But our focus returns to the north, where in 320 CE, a local chief named Chandragupta I, deliberately evoking the name of the Maurya founder, established what would become the Gupta Empire. The Gupta period, lasting roughly from 320 to 550 CE, is often called India's Golden Age, a characterization that, while perhaps exaggerated, captures something real about this era's cultural achievements. Under rulers like Samudragupta and Chandragupta II, the Gupta Empire controlled most of northern India through a combination of direct rule and tributary relationships. The administration was less centralized than the Maurya system, relying more on local officials and land grants to Brahmins and temples. This decentralization would prove both a strength and a weakness. What makes the Gupta period golden is not primarily its political history, but its cultural production. Consider the achievements. Kalidasa, often called the Shakespeare of Sanskrit literature, composed his masterpieces during this era: the play Shakuntala, the epic poem Raghuvamsha, the lyric Meghajuta. The cave paintings at Ajanta, depicting scenes from Buddhist legends with extraordinary grace and sophistication, were largely created during Gupta times. The iron pillar at Delhi, standing rust-free after 16 centuries, testifies to metallurgical expertise. The intellectual achievements were equally impressive. Aryabhata calculated pi to 4 decimal places, proposed that the Earth rotates on its axis, and developed algebraic techniques. The decimal system with 0, arguably India's most influential gift to world civilization, was refined during this period. Ayurveda, the traditional Indian medical system, was codified in texts that would be studied for millennia. In religion, the Gupta era saw the classical flowering of Hindu devotional traditions. The worship of Vishnu, Shiva, and the goddess Devi took forms recognizable in Hinduism today. Elaborate temple architecture emerged, featuring increasingly sophisticated sculptural programs. Buddhism remained vibrant, with the Nalanda Monastery, essentially a university attracting scholars from across Asia. The Gupta Empire did not fall dramatically, but rather faded gradually under pressure from the Hunas, related to the Huns who troubled Europe in the 5th century. By 550 CE, political fragmentation had returned to northern India. But the cultural patterns established during the Gupta period, in religion, art, literature, and science, would persist and spread throughout South and Southeast Asia, making the Gupta legacy far more durable than its political structures. The 6 centuries following the Gupta collapse are sometimes dismissed as India's medieval period, a term carrying unfortunate connotations of stagnation. In reality, this era witnessed remarkable dynamism. The construction of monumental temples, the flourishing of regional cultures, sophisticated developments in philosophy and religion, and the first significant incursions of Islam into the subcontinent. Northern India fragmented into competing kingdoms, the Pratiharas, Palas, and Rashtrakutas being the most powerful. These dynasties fought endlessly for control of Kannauj, strategically located on the Ganges, in what historians call the tripartite struggle. Their conflicts prevented any single power from establishing subcontinental dominance, but did not prevent cultural achievement. This period saw the construction of some of India's most magnificent temples. The Kailasanatha temple at Ellora, carved entirely from a single rock outcropping, represents one of humanity's most ambitious sculptural achievements. The temples at Khajuraho, famous for their erotic sculptures, combine architectural brilliance with a celebration of human desire as a path to the divine. In the south, the Chola dynasty built the Brihadishwara temple at Thanjavur, its tower rising over 60 meters, a mountain of stone dedicated to Shiva. The Chola Empire, 850–1279 CE, deserves particular attention. Under rulers like Rajaraja I and Rajendra I, the Cholas built a naval power unprecedented in Indian history. Their fleets dominated the Bay of Bengal, conquering Sri Lanka, raiding Southeast Asia, and possibly reaching as far as Sumatra. This was not merely military adventure, but the protection and expansion of lucrative trade routes. Chola bronzes, depicting Hindu deities with extraordinary elegance, remain among the finest examples of Indian metalwork. Philosophically, this period produced some of India's most influential thinkers. Shankara, in the 8th century, systematized Advaita Vedanta, arguing that the apparent multiplicity of existence masks an underlying unity, that Brahman alone is real, and the individual soul is ultimately identical with this absolute reality. His intellectual successors, Ramanuja and Madhva, proposed qualified non-dualist and dualist alternatives. These debates, conducted in rigorous Sanskrit treatises, represent philosophical achievement of the highest order. Meanwhile, in the northwest, history was taking a turn that would transform India forever. Arab armies had conquered Sind in 712 CE, establishing a Muslim presence at the subcontinent's edge. But it was the Turkish raids of Mahmud of Ghazni, 997–1030 CE, that truly shocked the Indian heartland. Mahmud conducted 17 campaigns into India, primarily to plunder the wealth accumulated in Hindu temples. The destruction of the Somnath temple, legend has it that Mahmud personally smashed its idol, became a defining trauma in Hindu memory. Mahmud did not seek to establish an empire in India. He returned to Afghanistan with his plunder. But his raids demonstrated both the wealth of the subcontinent and the military vulnerability of its divided kingdoms. Future invaders would draw the obvious conclusion. In 1192, Muhammad of Ghor defeated the Rajput king Prithviraj Chauhan at the Second Battle of Tarin, opening northern India to Turkish conquest. When Muhammad was assassinated in 1206, his general Qutbuddin Aibak established himself as Sultan of Delhi, founding what would become the Delhi Sultanate, the first of several Muslim-ruled states that would dominate India for centuries. The Delhi Sultanate was not a single dynasty, but a succession of 5. The Mamluks, or slave dynasty, the Khaljis, the Tughlaqs, the Sayyids, and the Lodis. Each rose, reigned, and fell, but together they established patterns of Indo-Islamic culture that would profoundly shape the subcontinent. The early sultans faced a fundamental challenge: how to rule a vast Hindu majority from a position of military dominance but numerical minority. Their solutions varied. Outright conversion was generally not forced. Indeed, mass conversion would have eliminated the jizya tax on non-Muslims that helped fund the state. Hindu temples were sometimes destroyed, especially during conquest, but many survived and even received royal patronage. A pragmatic accommodation emerged, varying by ruler and region. The greatest of the Delhi sultans was arguably Alauddin Khalji, R1296–1316, whose military campaigns extended sultanate power into the Deccan and even the far south of India, the first time a northern power had achieved such reach. Alauddin implemented price controls to provision his large-standing army, maintained an elaborate spy network, and successfully repelled multiple Mongol invasions that might otherwise have devastated India as thoroughly as Central Asia and Persia. The Tughlaqs who followed were an erratic dynasty. Muhammad bin Tughlaq, R1325–1351, was perhaps medieval India's most eccentric ruler, brilliant, innovative, and catastrophically impractical. He attempted to introduce token currency, a form of paper money, to relocate his entire capital from Delhi to the Deccan and to conquer Central Asia. Each project failed spectacularly. His successor Firuz Shah Tughlaq focused on infrastructure, building canals and cities, but lacked the military capacity to hold the empire together. By the late 14th century, the Sultanate was fatally weakened. In 1398, the Central Asian conqueror Tamerlane, sacked Delhi in an orgy of destruction that the city took a century to recover from. The later Sayyid and Lodi dynasties controlled little beyond the capital region, while provincial governors established independent sultanates in Bengal, Gujarat, Malwa, and the Deccan. Yet for all its political turbulence, the Sultanate period produced remarkable cultural synthesis. Persian became the language of administration and high culture, profoundly influencing the development of Hindi and Urdu. Indo-Islamic architecture emerged, blending Persian techniques, the pointed arch, the dome, the minaret, with Indian traditions. The Qutub Minar, begun by Aibak and completed by his successors, remains one of Delhi's most iconic monuments. Sufi saints like Nizamuddin Auliya attracted followers across religious lines, establishing shrines that remain centers of devotion today. In April 1526, at the First Battle of Panipat, a Central Asian prince named Babur defeated the last Lodi Sultan with a force vastly outnumbered, but equipped with something his opponent lacked: gunpowder weapons. This victory established the Mughal Empire, which at its height would control nearly the entire Indian subcontinent and preside over one of history's most remarkable cultural efflorescences. Babur was a descendant of both Timur and Genghis Khan. The word Mughal derives from Mongol. His memoirs, the Baburnama, reveal a man of sophisticated tastes who frankly disliked the Indian climate and longed for the melons of Central Asia, yet recognized the wealth and potential of his new domain. He died in 1530, leaving an unstable legacy. His son Humayun lost the empire to the Afghan adventurer Sher Shah Suri and spent 15 years in Persian exile before reclaiming Delhi in 1555, only to die the following year by falling down his library stairs. It fell to his son Akbar, ascending the throne at age 13 to truly establish Mughal greatness. Akbar R. 1556–1605 ranks among history's most remarkable rulers. Though likely illiterate, he possessed extraordinary intelligence, curiosity, and political acumen. His military campaigns consolidated control over northern India and pushed into the Deccan. But his greatest achievements were administrative and cultural. Akbar's genius lay in creating a system that co-opted rather than excluded India's Hindu majority. He abolished the jizya tax on non-Muslims, married Rajput princesses, and incorporated Rajput warriors into the highest ranks of his nobility. His Mansabdari system assigned ranked nobles, Mansabdars, to military and administrative posts regardless of religion, creating a diverse ruling elite personally loyal to the emperor. He patronized artists and scholars of all backgrounds, commissioning illustrated manuscripts that blended Persian and Indian traditions. Most controversially, Akbar initiated religious discussions at his court that included not only Muslims of various persuasions, but Hindus, Jains, Zoroastrians, and even Portuguese Jesuits. These debates led him to formulate the Din-i-Ilahi, a syncretic personal religion that offended Orthodox Muslims without attracting Hindu adherents. The experiment died with Akbar, but it revealed his genuine curiosity about ultimate truth. Akbar's son Jahangir, R. 1605–1627, was a connoisseur and aesthete whose reign saw Mughal painting reach its zenith. His son Shah Jahan, R. 1628–1658, was the builder among Mughal emperors. The Red Fort in Delhi, the Jama Masjid, the Pearl Mosque at Agra, these were his creations. But his immortal monument is, of course, the Taj Mahal, built as a mausoleum for his beloved wife Mumtaz Mahal, who died giving birth to their 14th child. This marble poem to love and grief represents the culmination of Indo-Islamic architecture. Shah Jahan's reign ended badly. In 1657, he fell ill, triggering a succession war among his 4 sons. The victor was Aurangzeb, who imprisoned his father in Agra Fort, from where, legend has it, the old emperor could see the Taj Mahal through a window,
and systematically eliminated his brothers. Aurangzeb, R. 1658–1707, was the most controversial Mughal emperor. Personally pious and ascetic, he reimposed the jizya, destroyed some Hindu temples, and pursued policies that alienated many who had been reconciled to Mughal rule under Akbar's system. His endless Deccan campaigns, aimed at conquering the last independent sultanates and subduing the Maratha insurgency, drained the treasury and consumed his final decades. When Aurangzeb died in 1707 at age 88, the Mughal Empire was territorially larger than ever before, but institutionally hollowed out. His successors, entangled in harem intrigues and dependent on regional power brokers, watched the empire fragment into what would become princely states. The Mughal emperor remained a symbolic figure. Indeed, he would remain so until 1857, but real power had passed elsewhere. While the Mughals declined, new powers emerged from the subcontinent's fracturing political landscape. Most significant were the Marathas, whose rise represents one of India's great indigenous challenges to imperial authority. Shivaji Bhansale, founder of the Maratha kingdom, was born in 1630 into a family of local Deccan warriors serving the Bijapur Sultanate. Through guerrilla warfare, strategic fortifications, and sheer audacity, he carved out an independent domain in the Western Ghats, defying both Bijapur and the Mughals. In 1674, he crowned himself Chhatrapati, meaning sovereign, in a ceremony designed to establish Hindu royal legitimacy. Shivaji's legend looms large in Indian, especially Maharashtrian memory. He was the Hindu king who humiliated Mughal generals, who escaped from Aurangzeb's custody hidden in a fruit basket, or so the story goes, who built a navy and challenged foreign powers at sea. After his death in 1680, his successors faced brutal Mughal campaigns, but the Marathas survived, eventually expanding under the leadership of the Peshwas, hereditary prime ministers who became the real power behind the throne. By the mid-18th century, Maratha power stretched from Peshawar to Orissa, from Gujarat to the Deccan. They extracted tribute from the Mughal emperor himself and seemed poised to establish their own subcontinental hegemony. Then came disaster. In 1761, at the Third Battle of Panipat, a massive Maratha army confronted the Afghan invader Ahmed Shah Abdali. The result was catastrophic. Perhaps 100,000 Marathas died, including the Peshwa's son and much of the kingdom's military leadership. The Maratha Confederacy survived but never recovered its former unity, fragmenting into competing states under chiefs like Scindia, Holkar, Gaikwad, and Bhansale. Meanwhile, other regional powers consolidated. In the south, the Nizam of Hyderabad presided over a wealthy, culturally sophisticated state. Mysore, under the formidable Hyder Ali and his son Tipu Sultan, deployed rockets and European military techniques against all comers. In Punjab, Ranjit Singh forged the Sikh Empire, the last indigenous power to hold significant territory before British dominance became total. Bengal, technically still Mughal, was effectively independent under its Nawabs. This fragmented political landscape created the opportunity that a trading company would seize with consequences still reverberating today. The English East India Company arrived in India in 1608, seeking pepper and textiles. For over a century, it remained primarily a trading concern, establishing coastal factories at Surat, Madras, Bombay, and Calcutta. The company made profits, fought occasional skirmishes, and gradually built military capacity to protect its commercial interests. The transformation from trader to ruler began in Bengal. In 1756, the young Nawab Suraj ud-Dawla seized the company's Calcutta factory, allegedly confining British prisoners in the infamous Black Hole of Calcutta. Whether the atrocity occurred as described, the response was decisive. Robert Clive retook Calcutta and then, in 1757, at the Battle of Plassey, defeated the Nawab with a combination of military force and conspiracy with Bengali banking interests. Plassey established British dominance in Bengal, but the company initially ruled through puppet Nawabs. The turning point came in 1765, when the Mughal emperor granted the company the Diwani, the right to collect revenue in Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. This transformed a trading company into a territorial power, administering millions of subjects. The consequences were catastrophic. Company rule prioritized revenue extraction over governance. The Bengal famine of 1770 killed an estimated 10 million people, perhaps a third of the population, while the company continued collecting taxes. Criticism mounted in Britain, leading to regulation. The Regulating Act of 1773 and Pitt's India Act of 1784 brought the company under increasing parliamentary oversight. Through war, diplomacy, and subsidiary alliances, the company expanded relentlessly. The four Mysore Wars ended with Tipu Sultan's death defending his capital in 1799. The Marathas were finally broken in 1818. The Sikhs, after two hard-fought wars, fell in 1849. By mid-century, the company controlled nearly all of South Asia either directly or through treaties with nominally independent princely states. British rule brought transformation. Railroads stitched the subcontinent together, primarily for commercial and military purposes, but with profound social consequences. The telegraph enabled rapid communication. English education created a new elite class familiar with Western ideas of liberalism, nationalism, and self-determination. Legal reforms introduced common law concepts. The caste system, far from being abolished, was often hardened through colonial census categories. The economic impact remains debated. India's share of global manufacturing declined precipitously, as British policy favored exports of raw materials and imports of manufactured goods. The textile industry that had clothed much of the world collapsed under competition from Lancashire mills. Yet some Indian capitalists found opportunities in the new order, and modern industries, jute, cotton, steel, eventually emerged. In 1857, everything nearly fell apart. The immediate trigger was the new Enfield rifle, whose cartridges, rumored to be greased with cow and pig fat, offended both Hindu and Muslim soldiers, sepoys. But the rebellion that erupted reflected deeper grievances. Displaced aristocrats, dispossessed landlords, and religious anxieties about Christian missionary activity. Beginning as a military mutiny, it became a broader uprising across northern India, with the aged Mughal Emperor Bahadur Shah Zafar proclaimed as figurehead leader. The British suppressed the rebellion with tremendous brutality. Delhi was sacked. Thousands were executed. Bahadur Shah was exiled to Burma, ending the Mughal dynasty. And the company itself became a casualty. In 1858, the British Crown assumed direct control of India, inaugurating the British Raj. The decades following 1858 saw the consolidation of colonial rule under a succession of viceroys. Queen Victoria was proclaimed Empress of India in 1876. The colonial administration employed Indians in subordinate positions while reserving higher ranks for British officials. The Indian Council's acts gradually introduced limited representative institutions, too little, too slowly, to satisfy rising Indian aspirations. For Indian nationalism was awakening. The Indian National Congress, founded in 1885, initially sought reform within the British system. But successive generations grew more radical. The partition of Bengal in 1905 sparked mass protests. Revolutionary terrorists assassinated British officials. World War I, in which over 1 million Indians served and 60,000 died, raised expectations of reform that went largely unfulfilled. The Jallianwala Bagh massacre of 1919, when British troops fired on an unarmed crowd in Amritsar killing hundreds, radicalized a generation. Into this ferment stepped Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, a lawyer trained in London who had developed his philosophy of nonviolent resistance in South Africa. Gandhi transformed the Congress into a mass movement, mobilizing peasants and workers alongside the educated elite. His campaigns of civil disobedience, the non-cooperation movement, the Salt March, the Quit India movement, made India ungovernable through moral force rather than violence. Gandhi did not work alone. Jawaharlal Nehru, represented modernist, socialist nationalism. Subhas Chandra Bose took a more militant path, eventually leading the Indian National Army in alliance with Japan during World War II. Muhammad Ali Jinnah articulated the Muslim League's demand for a separate Muslim state, convinced that Muslims would be marginalized in a Hindu-majority independent India. World War II broke British capacity to hold India. In 1947, the exhausted empire withdrew, partitioning the subcontinent into India and Pakistan. The partition was accompanied by horrific communal violence as Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs attacked each other in Punjab and Bengal. Perhaps 1 million died. 10 to 15 million were displaced in one of history's largest mass migrations. Gandhi himself fell to an assassin's bullet in January 1948, killed by a Hindu extremist who blamed him for being too accommodating to Muslims. On August 15, 1947, Jawaharlal Nehru addressed the nation. At the stroke of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India will awake to life and freedom. A new chapter had begun. The challenges facing independent India were immense. Partition had severed economic links, traumatized populations, and created an immediate refugee crisis. The princely states had to be integrated, a process accomplished largely through diplomacy, with notable exceptions like the military incorporation of Hyderabad. A constitution had to be written, establishing the framework for the world's largest democracy. The Indian Constitution, adopted in 1950, was a remarkable document. Drafted by a committee chaired by B.R. Ambedkar, a Dalit who had experienced caste discrimination firsthand, it established a parliamentary democracy with fundamental rights, an independent judiciary, and universal adult suffrage. India became a republic while remaining in the Commonwealth. Nehru dominated the early decades, serving as prime minister until his death in 1964. His vision was of a secular, socialist, democratic India achieving modernity through planned industrialization. The state would control commanding heights of the economy while permitting private enterprise within limits. Non-alignment in foreign policy would allow India to navigate between Cold War superpowers while pursuing its own interests. The results were mixed. Economic growth was modest. The so-called Hindu rate of growth of about 3.5% annually kept pace with population increase, but did not dramatically raise living standards. Green Revolution technologies increased agricultural production, averting feared famines. But poverty remained endemic, and the license permit Raj created inefficiency and corruption. The 1962 war with China was a humiliating defeat, shattering Nehruvian assumptions about Asian solidarity. The 1965 and 1971 wars with Pakistan were more successful, the latter resulting in the creation of Bangladesh from former East Pakistan. Under Indira Gandhi, Nehru's daughter, no relation to Mahatma Gandhi, India became a nuclear power in 1974. Indira Gandhi's rule was marked by both achievements and authoritarianism. The emergency of 1977, when civil liberties were suspended, represented independent India's gravest constitutional crisis. Yet she won re-election after lifting the emergency, only to be assassinated by her Sikh bodyguards in 1984 following the storming of the Golden Temple. The economic transformation came in 1991, when Finance Minister Manmohan Singh, facing a balance of payments crisis, initiated liberalization. The license Raj was dismantled, trade barriers reduced, and foreign investment welcomed. The decades since have seen sustained high growth, the emergence of a substantial middle class, and India's rise as an IT services powerhouse. Poverty, while still extensive, has declined significantly. Politically, India has evolved from Congress dominance to genuine multi-party competition. Regional parties representing linguistic and caste identities have become powerful. The Bharatiya Janata Party, BJP, representing Hindu nationalist politics, has emerged as the Congress's main rival. Governing at the center since 2014, India today is a land of contrasts. Software engineers and subsistence farmers, ancient temples and gleaming malls, democratic vibrancy, and persistent inequalities. With over 1.4 billion people, it has surpassed China as the world's most populous country. Its challenges are immense: poverty, environmental degradation, communal tensions, regional disparities. But so is its potential. We began this journey in the ruins of Mohenjo-daro, amid mud brick walls and mysterious seals. We have traveled through Vedic rituals and Buddhist enlightenment, through Maurya centralization and Gupta brilliance. We have witnessed the Delhi sultans and the Mughal grandeur, the Maratha resurgence and the British domination. We have arrived at a democratic republic that, for all its flaws, has sustained freedom for over 75 years. What threads connect these disparate eras? Perhaps the subcontinent's remarkable capacity for absorption and synthesis. Invaders came: Aryans, Greeks, Turks, Mughals, British, and each was, in some sense, Indianized even as they transformed India. The Hindu tradition showed extraordinary flexibility, accommodating new gods, new philosophies, new social arrangements. Buddhism and Jainism arose within India's religious ferment. Islam and Christianity arrived from outside but took on distinctly Indian characteristics. Perhaps, too, we might note the resilience of Indian civilization. Empires rose and fell. Political unity was the exception rather than the rule. Yet cultural continuity persisted. The Sanskrit epics composed millennia ago are still performed. The gods worshipped in Gupta temples still receive offerings. The philosophical questions, debated in the Upanishads, still occupy thinkers today. India's history offers no single lesson, no neat moral. It is too vast, too complex, too contradictory. It contains sublime spiritual achievements and appalling cruelties, dazzling artistic beauty and grinding poverty, democratic idealism and caste oppression. It is, in other words, fully human, and the story continues. In villages and cities, in parliaments and protests, in temples and tech parks, 1.5 billion people are writing the next chapter. The history of India is not merely past. It is being made, today and tomorrow, and for millennia to come. This has been a Whispering Tome documentary.